Emulation is something that's become pretty important in recent years, given how hard it is to find old games consoles, and how expensive a used one would be. But emulation is also something that the big video games companies have a massive problem with. Specifically, Nintendo is the worst about it, in my opinion. You see, while emulators are really important in game preservation, especially for games from companies that went under, or from companies that refuse to make their games available in a reasonable modern fashion, emulators also have a dark side. People can use them for piracy, which is not exactly something that the games companies want you to do. Nintendo, in particular, seems to be quite mad about a Nintendo Switch emulator called Yuzu, and has followed a lawsuit against the company that makes it, which is called Tropic Haze LLC. Now, this could be a fairly big lawsuit. There are years of precedent about how emulation of a game or other thing you own is perfectly legal, so long as you're doing so by reverse engineering. However, if this case ends up in Nintendo's favor, I'd expect we see a slow legal pushback on where the line is, since the video game hardware companies have massive financial incentives to try and make the law as friendly as possible to them. The specific problem for the Yuzu emulator isn't really related to the base emulation ability of the software, but basically, Switch games are all encrypted. You can't decrypt them to get them to play if you don't have the specific decryption keys from Nintendo, which are included on the physical Nintendo Switches. Now, you can reverse engineer pretty much any piece of hardware you want, but unless you've got a quantum computer or are willing to wait till the end of the universe, your odds of reverse engineering the actual decryption keys are basically zero. So it seems like Nintendo is arguing that because the Yuzu emulator uses these keys in order to decrypt the games when running them, it's illegal, since there's no way they could legally get those keys. Quickly, take a second to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks. Now, Yuzu doesn't provide the decryption keys. Instead, they had a guide on how to get them from your own Nintendo Switch to use with the software. Now, whether or not it's legal to actually do that yourself is kind of a gray area, I think. Granted, I'm not a lawyer, so take this with a grain of salt, but it's possible that it is legal to get them from a Switch that you own, since it's a piece of hardware that you own, and we do have federal laws that allow for the repair and alteration of hardware devices that you own. And it's also possible that it's illegal, since you have to hack the Switch to get the code, which Nintendo might argue breaks some obscure copyright law, since you could do it in order to circumvent piracy protections, and there is established law around that being illegal. I don't know how it will go. It will probably depend on the judge and how well versed he is with technology. Granted, it looks like they filed the lawsuit in Rhode Island for some reason, not exactly the most tech-focused area. The judges may not have as much expertise as they would in some other area of the country that deals with a lot more tech cases, like Silicon Valley. Now, Nintendo argues that there is no lawful way to play any Nintendo Switch game on an emulator like Yuzu, which I personally, again, not a lawyer, think is wrong. The Copyright Office has in the past allowed people to use emulators and other software to make copies of software that they already own for archival purposes. Nintendo argues that won't apply because you don't actually own your Switch games, saying that really, when you buy a copy, you're just getting Nintendo's authorization to play a single copy on an unmodified Nintendo Switch console, and that you can't play their games on any platform without Nintendo's approval. Nintendo has the right to decide whether or when to enter the market of games for platforms other than its own console. Now, I don't think either of those arguments align with the rules that allow for archiving, but that's not something we will know for sure until a judge rules on it. Yuzu also potentially has some arguments they can make about how they allow for accessibility features that benefit disabled gamers that the Nintendo Switch does not have. In the 2021 exemption rulings, the Copyright Office allowed for the circumvention that enables individuals with disabilities to use alternative input devices to play video games, but they might have a hard time arguing that the emulator is really an accessibility device, since that's probably not the biggest feature or the reason most people would use an emulator like Yuzu. The big problem for Yuzu is that, well, Nintendo's a big company. They have a lot of money, and they seem to really like using that money to aggressively enforce their copyright, even, in my opinion, to the detriment of their own fans. Look at the Smash Bros community for an example. And given what I could find looking up Tropic Haze LLC, who make Yuzu, it doesn't look like a massive operation that can afford to fight a legal battle against Nintendo. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be a real uphill battle for Yuzu here. The problem is that this might end up affecting all emulation nationwide. One win here peels back the precedent a little, and then slowly over time the companies can remake the precedent in their favor with more lawsuits, which would be bad, I think. Not because I think people need to emulate current gen games. I really don't see a reason to bother with that, though I don't think it should be illegal, but rather because emulation is the only way that some older games continue to exist in the modern world. The end of emulation would mean the destruction destruction of decades of video game history, which would really suck. At the end of the day though, it's not like the Yuzu people can say that they didn't ever think this would happen. I mean, they made an emulator for a system from a company that has a history of being litigious. Nintendo ruined that guy in Canada's life because he made hacked games or something. So hopefully Yuzu has a decent plan or have some fund for legal protection. I mean, no one can argue that emulators don't have an association with piracy, and piracy is illegal and bad. So they should know that something like this lawsuit is possible, given the reputation emulators have for piracy. What do you guys think? Did Yuzu fly too close to the sun, or is Nintendo in the wrong here? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching all the way till the end. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and God bless you.